A great deal of my time in politics, writing, and trying to get a grasp on the world around me has been dedicated to reading a lot of older and not so mainstream texts. It has become a niche market of sorts on the online right, trying to resurrect books that have covered parts of history not so accepted by the mainstream, or written from or on behalf of the unfashionable side of certain conflicts. Whole accounts and businesses exist on this side, whether it was Mystery Grove trying to tell you to read, and often with humorous threats of cartoon violence, the works of General Peter Wrangel or Peter Kemp, to Antelope Hill Publishing, Passage Press, and countless others specializing in translating and getting more esoteric texts out to a willing and buying audience. In this time, there's been a great deal of focus on the works of Oswald Spengler, Arnold Toynbee, Francis Parker Yockey, and even more mainstream writers on the subject of history and planning, such as that of Isaac Asimov, Walter Miller, and Anthony Burgess. The fascination with history, as the oft-repeated line about those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it, gives us an indication that we are always looking for wise men, patriarchs, sages, oracles, holy fathers to give us a clue as to where we are going and how to best weather the storm of our age. It's safe to say that you can get more out of these books than you ever will with what's taught in your usual public English school courses when it comes to, say, Orwell's 1984 or Huxley's Brave New World. Even the grim, dark fantasies of Warhammer 40k have been popularized, especially by a recent tweet from Mr. Bennett's Phylactery, who had said something along the lines of, "We're all living in the 40k universe, we're just picking which faction we're a part of." Our pop culture has been absorbed, and really it always has been, into the cultural battles and war lines of today, as the classic science fiction franchises, once well known and beloved, are now desperately trying to push the dumpster fire of their progressive-themed movies and TV shows out with extinguishers, only to be left with the heaps of ashen garbage that are barely recognizable to the fans who once loved their original works and writers. Every side of any kind of political assumption group and tribal formation draws parallels to films, movies, and TV shows as models, or at the very least reflections of how the world actually works. Despite its annoying tendencies of being overplayed, I'm sure many can remember people citing Harry Potter for their political understanding of the world before J.K. Rowling went turf. Read another book is an older but well-aged meme about our general culture, as well, forgive me for saying this, media literacy. There are plenty of books about historical events, or future historical events that run parallel with our own society, wherein our ideologies play out in a way that gives us the chance to interrogate, or at the very least explore what they might look like in practice. Some of these books are overly preachy, thinly veiled political screeds like that of Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. Heinlein and Asimov, or even the Futinarians in the late 30s, with their Marxist and Stalinist tendencies included, had their own world building above and beyond, whilst giving their politics room to actually be explored. For the 21st century, the writings of Theodore Judson have inhabited a space of predictions, parallels, and politics for the online right. Judson, whose works include Fitzpatrick's War and The Martian General's Daughter, are among his most well-known. Individuals like Charles Haywood, ex-user Enoch Powell, at Mog the Urbanite, and myself have tried to give his works the attention they thoroughly deserve, in part because of its excellent writing, but also because his works feel like they speak to the current moment, with our reactionary tendencies included. Would I be able to call this 73-year-old baby boomer a reactionary? I'm not too sure. I don't know the man from Adam. Although reading his works, I think he has more grounded understanding of the world than most of his generation, and his writings illustrate a historical appreciation for how empires rise and fall. The Martian General's Daughter is a futuristic retelling of the Year of the Five Emperors, and available in ebook form, as getting your hands on a physical copy is nigh impossible. I will recommend Charles Haywood's review of the book that's available on his website and YouTube channel, and I have to say his reviewing style is always entertaining, as more often than not do his reviews bleed into political wish lists and calls for justice that many would call Fed-posty. I'll link his review in the description. As much as I enjoy the two books by Judson, I was recently informed that for a very short time in 2007, he had his own blog. I'm not aware if he still writes or has written anything since then, but just like many people discovering Curtis Yarvin's Unqualified Reservations from the early and late 2000s, or finding a book that gets it, so too did I go giddy with excitement to find out that a niche author that I enjoy had written more than I initially thought. To go back to 2007, when I was just 12 years old and living overseas with a radically different and limited understanding of the world, to see how he saw it as a middle-aged man born in a different epoch of American greatness, talking about kids these days to his own works and audience, is a strange digital treasure that really tickles a certain type of overly online person like myself. While Judson's works give insightful, sometimes uneasy prophetic, or perhaps a certain type of reader wants him to be prophetic, more on that later, feeling about the various technological factions that have seeped into the greater public consciousness and the online noosphere, the country falling apart to corruption, instability due to immigration, etc., you're left wondering when the Yukons of Fitzpatrick's War are ever going to emerge and right the ship, and who just might be the shadowy timerman of his great novel. 18 years ago, he wrote about this, addressing the very question if someone like the Yukons or anyone like them could one day rule and take over America. On that question, he writes the following, quote, "The late Abbie Hoffman said many foolish things in his lifetime, but the one thing he said that was true was, to be a revolutionary in America is like being a wallflower at an orgy. The truth is, as much as some Americans claim to dislike their homeland and the modern world in general, they in fact love the personal freedom, the wealth, the social and physical mobility, and even the constant entertainments one enjoys here. So I would have to say no, the Yukons are not currently a possibility. While I do think we will see a rise in secret societies in our near future, during chaotic times, people find comfort in such groups, witness the mystery cults of the Hellenistic and late Roman eras, the secret societies of the Italian Renaissance, but for one of these societies to come to power, the government would have to become much weaker than it presently is, and people much poorer. Such a group would also have to become a nation unto itself and able to tend for itself in every way. My imaginary Yukons do that, but it takes them 3 generations to become that strong, and they are the benefactors of a number of technological discoveries a real group would probably never have." End quote. Now, this was written in 2007, before the age of Trump, COVID, the great financial crisis and collapse, or any major debates about the strengths and weaknesses of a regime of Turbo America and the like. Judson's observations hold true to me, that we are not anywhere close to living in the conditions that would engender feudal, semi-autonomous groups and territories or uprisings. At least not yet. For as much as we live in blatant anarcho-tyranny, low-trust societies, and with our sovereignty and identity up for debate, as well as extraction, the goods are still pouring in, and the supply chains hasn't gotten to a point where we are on subsistence farming. There are certainly mystery cults going around, don't get me wrong, from spirit-cooking occultists in power to others certainly more shady and unknown in Silicon Valley. It's certainly hard to shake the desire for a political outcome, to wish upon a star wherein the great man of history will come victoriously through the land, and the papers will change their tunes, calling him a villain, and then an emperor, as Napoleon once was, as he marched on Paris returning from his exile. While I certainly take the psalmist's words to heart, trust not in princes and the sons of men in whom there is no salvation, the temptation for the great man to emerge as an earthly savior is always present. Don't get me wrong, wanting a Nostradamus figure to tell you how things will go will always be there. It is innate to the human condition to seek prophets. Throughout the history of the Christian faith and the churches that have their focus on eschatology being so central that whole sects have born out of failed predictions and far-off exegesis of the end times and in the book of the Apocalypse. Even as we enter an age of apostasy and madness, the era that St. Anthony the Great once spoke of some 1700 years ago, we turn to authors, fictions, theorists, and political scientists to help navigate the madness that they study, or were survivors of a madness similar to the one we inhabit now. It's a matter of faith, a trust in our reason and ability to deduce that our instincts aren't wrong and that we have more control, at least through the understanding of our current age, that would make us feel less adrift in the sea of life. If knowing really is half the battle, then we ought to know as much as we can. Our technology allows us to get short summaries. Whole YouTube and political personalities live off of making useful graphs. Our facsimile of omnipotence still leaves us grappling with the questions of our time, leaving a few to pick a certain thinker or writer to be their guy that they go to as a hermeneutical tool to examine the present age. Many fellow travelers in the spaces I inhabit are such characters. I'm a Jacques Ellul guy, I'm the Spangler scholar, I'm the McLuhan disciple, or even trying to bring lesser-known names like Carl Ludwig von Haller into the English-speaking political ecosystem. This isn't to be disrespectful to their study or their works. After all, I am only one man who works two jobs. Their functions as intermediaries certainly help in my own intellectual pursuits, while I try to avoid making predictions myself. As Judson writes, quote, "It would be easier to make fun of those who predict the future and are so foolish as to put their predictions in print for everyone else to find years later. But it would be overkill. We all express ideas about the future, usually after the last of the wine is gone and we are feeling very wise. We, of course, are as wrong as the experts are, but most of us only share our foolishness with friends and family, and our loved ones are far too kind to bring up the stupid things we said. The two questions, in fact, why do we insist on doing it, and why are we always so wrong about what the future will be?" End quote. Sure, we can talk about the future and what it may hold, but to ask me what do I think what the world will look like in 100 years will have me quickly explaining that I don't have the powers of clairvoyance. Yet if you ask me what got me so interested in things like geopolitics and the rest, I will tell you that it was my freshman year of high school and I picked up a book from Barnes & Noble called The Next 100 Years by strategic forecasting founder George Friedman. As a young teenager, I thought the idea of using geography, history, economics, and demographics to predict the future felt like such a perfect science, the real-world alchemy of the 21st century. But just like with real alchemy, you're not going to get the gold you want, but you're certainly going to make some coin along the way. We want to be the ones who can look back and say, even if our predictions are short-sighted, "Aha! I called it, and you didn't." It's a fun dick-measuring contest of online prescience and clout, but nevertheless an important avenue in which how your words and predictions validate your ever-evolving worldview. It helps keep your eyes on you. It helps you grow your subscriber count in that money box that flows in every month from Subscribestar or Patreon. But even in these predictions, whilst made with facts or data points to give indicators for why you think an event or trend might go a certain way, they are still heavily reliant on faith, that old gut feeling. I say this as someone who is pretty agreeable to most theses of cyclical history, and has somewhat of a winning track record in my opinion, providentially so, some might add. Whether you're a techno-optimist, a neo-pagan Luddite, or someone trying to climb the ladder of divine ascent, we turn to our datasets, our Volkish way of being, sacred tradition to guide us looking back while we are walking forward into the age to come. We're determined to find answers somewhere, some allegory, some metaphor, some kind of Ariadne's thread to lead us out of the challenges of our time, or at least guide us as we face the minotaur of the future. I think Judson's blog post on history and predictions says it better than I ever could. Quote, "The two most famous novels written about the future in the past century, Orwell's 1984 and Huxley's Brave New World, were not meant to be predictions, and were in fact novels about tendencies that were current during the authors' lifetimes. Yet we want them to be blueprints for what is to come. As horrible as both Orwell's and Huxley's visions are, we actually take comfort in believing that they are showing us the truth, for we find it better to know the future, rather than to forge ahead into the darkness without a guide. Once humans placed their trust in something greater than themselves, but we have become as gods ourselves, and we want to see where we are going and are willing to believe that some among us can act as scouts. To think otherwise would be to doubt the modern world." End quote. Theodore Judson's novels and works published and unpublished gives us that hopeful guide that maybe we can take our fictions and use them as templates to propel us toward a future where we might suffer now, but our posterity may endure, conquer, and overcome. That is something innate to the human condition. But we have enough records, reason, and knowledge to know that there is much that will pass, or will likely come to pass as the pages of history turn on this current moment. Whatever may come, I'm brutally reminded, in a way I think Judson knows, but perhaps is past the eyes and ears of many that put their trust in themselves and their riches, instead of something greater than themselves. After all, as the Creator and the ultimate guide of this world had said, therefore do not be anxious for the morrow will be worried unto itself. Sufficient is the day, is its own evil.